Hey everybody, it's John Kraska with EveryLibrary and the EveryLibrary Institute. It is Constitution Day 2025. We're having some very good conversations today, and I'm excited on EveryLibrary Live to be able to have this kind of policy conversation. I spend a lot of time on camera talking to authors, which is great. I love talking to authors. We have a big thing coming up for Banned Books Week 2025, the first week of October. Great. Let's talk about westerns. Let's talk about cookbooks. Let's talk about horror. I'm all in, but at the same time, I love talking about the policy stuff and about the way Americans think about the law, about the Constitution, about politics. And I'm really excited today to bring in, for Constitution Day 2025, a wonderful colleague and a good friend, Joe Caiazzo at 1788 Media. And Joe, I'm just thrilled that you can be here with me today in this kind of a context.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward
Absolutely. So Joe is an adjunct professor team of political science and political thought at Endicott College, and he's a partner with 1788, a Democratic communications firm. He's based in Boston, if any of you are wondering why President Kennedy is sitting on his shoulder like an angel. Joe, you and I got to know each other over the years. You've done some sessions for us before on political communications. We also have collaborated in a few states on communications with elected officials and voters about some big ideas like right to read laws and the structure of government. I want to chat with you a little bit about what it's like to be a political communication strategist in a time when the Constitution and some of our basics around things like libraries are so disrupted. So as a communication strategist, what advice would you give to library advocates when it comes to talking with electeds in a way that bridges what is really a bipartisan divide or a partisan divide about some stuff that's really basic?
Yeah, John, that's a really good question. I would start here. Libraries are not partisan, they're patriotic. Think about what they serve to do. They serve as centerpieces of culture and access to education and access to opportunity for so many. Every one of these public officials who you're speaking to, all they want is what's best for their constituents, or at least in theory. This is a great way to make this about society and building up the community in the district that they represent.
I love that that it's just pretty much a basic institution. It should resonate with anybody, regardless of where they are on the political spectrum, as it were. At Endicott College, where you're teaching now, how do you help students connect with some of those big constitutional ideas? Connect those big constitutional ideas to the practical realities of things, because a school board, a library board, those are really practical local politics.
Well, I want to start here. If you think about the framers of the Constitution, this was a collection of men, yes, it was all men, who set out on the sole purpose of creating a better society and a better tomorrow. So all the key principles that they went and put into the Constitution are directly applicable to everyday life. It's protected. Think about like your local town newspaper or what's left of them. Those were protected by the First Amendment. When you think about, to your point about the local school board, the ability to have the opportunity to walk down and cast your ballot for the people who you want to represent you, that's pretty amazing. And it's a really good, it's a really good way to go and illustrate what the Constitution is. It's this big, sweeping, grand idea that functions at all levels. Whether you're voting for the president or you're voting for the school board, you have the ability to go in and be a part of that contract, right? That social contract that goes in and trusts your public official with your vote, and in return, they're going to do what's right for you.
Joe, you said something a moment ago, and I've been in this business for a long time, and I've thought about the Constitution a bunch, but you said something a moment ago I've never heard before, and it makes a ton of sense. There was not a CNN or a Breitbart or a New York or a USA Today back in the day when they were writing the First Amendment. It was your local newspaper, whatever's left of it. Joe, that's a hell of an insight.
Freedom of assembly, too. At this period, there were your town criers, or you'd go and get your local news from going and hanging out at the local market or the town common. The freedom of assembly, freedom of the press, these are all directly linked to the betterment of society and the free flowing of information.
No, thank you for that, because I think I'm going to steal that talking point from you, and I'll credit you. Don't worry. So, yeah, Joe, I've seen you do it. I've seen you train candidates. I've seen you train organizers around the country. What are some of the most common mistakes that you see advocates making when they are trying to communicate about constitutional rights, like the right to read?
Sure. I think the biggest mistake that they make is try to make this big sweeping 30,000 foot argument. I think the number one way to go and connect with somebody is to hyper localize it, make it deeply personal. Book bans is a thing that you see happen on CNN, and it happens in a place that's far away from you. But the reality is book bans can affect your kid's school library, right? They can go and affect your public library. It can affect the curriculum that your students and your children are taught. These are hyper local and hyper personal issues. And I think the more we get away from, making these arguments about, about the battles that are going on in Congress, and you bring them down to your local town hall, your local school board, it becomes a lot more meaningful.
Yeah, that's interesting because the constitutional rights can be really abstract. I mean, most of what people know about constitutional rights comes from watching TV. You watch your Law and Order, you get your Fifth Amendment. They're going to take the Fifth. I mean, the application of the Constitution at that most local level, whether it's a school board set of policies or a public library board set of policies, localizing it like that, rooting it in the lived experience, I think is very smart.
And look, I think the other part that I want to add to that is you have to recognize there are 27 amendments to the Constitution. That means that there were 27 times in our nation's history where folks got together and proposed monumental sweeping change, and it for the sole purpose and intent of bettering society and bettering the country. When I think about the Constitution, I think about it as a framework to build a society that can thrive and a society that is free and fair for everybody. Even if that has not always been the case in practice, in theory, that has always been the goal. And that goes in ranges from what you see on the federal to down on the local level.
It's interesting that two of those amendments were about alcohol, both our conflicts with it as well as our perhaps a certain set of needs for it.
Very true.
Yeah. All right. So advocates who are on the defense it's difficult for them if you're always trying to do block and tackle. I mean, moving beyond defensive messaging about censorship or about First Amendment and telling a proactive story, Joe, as a communications professional in politics, how do you tell a proactive story about that free expression value system?
The best form of defense is a really, really good offense. And I think that it's something that we can point to our history. Think about this. In the mere 66-year window from when we learned to fly, we then landed on the moon in that very short time frame. That was because the advancements in science and technology just skyrocketed, no pun intended. If you look at our history, you see huge leaps and bounds in terms of lifespan and medicine and education and housing and the quality of life. To me, so much of this book ban talk has a lot to do with think about our future and think about what's at stake. Being able to allow people to explore different ideas, even ones they don't always go and agree with, are critically important to the advancement of society. And look, whether or not we believe it, we're all interconnected. So a person in Oklahoma reading a book may be able to find the cure to the next disease that's going and afflicting somebody in Maine. Or, the person or the farmer who has a problem in the middle of the country may be able to be helped by the person who's the student at Caltech. We are a large, sweeping, vast country, and we have the ability and the ingenuity and the desire to achieve greatness. And that is only done with the opportunity to learn, read, discuss, disagree, and engage in a meaningful dialogue. To me, so much of that begins and ends with the ability and access to education.
That is the kind of framing that should resonate with people outside of the library world. Inside the library world, we use words like intellectual freedom. That's great. It's a term of art where we talk with each other. And as you know, translating library stuff into everyday speech. But that idea that there's no fear, no favor, low barrier, to participation in essentially what is an economy of ideas. That should resonate with folks from all different walks of life.
We've always been an economy of ideas. Look at the Constitution. This document stemmed from, and I believe that Thomas Jefferson's quote was, he did not use any other document for inspiration. He came up with the original copy through a matter of common sense. We all know that that's not entirely true. It was built on the shoulders of generations of freedom of ideas and the ideas economy, going back to John Winthrop and even further.
So when we're when a little bit of coaching here, and this is on your comms side, not your Constitution side, going in to talk to a member of a state legislature. Okay, Congress is one thing, but state legislatures are where it's at. You know, as you know, the work that we've been doing here at EveryLibrary is really focused on either good bills in states that are possible to have good conversations in, or just block and tackle against bad bills in places that you got to throw a shoulder into. And yet these legislators that you go in to talk with, from a comms perspective, you go in to talk with, this is only one of like 57 things that they're doing that day. And it's the biggest thing for you, and it should be one of the bigger things for America if everything we just talked about for the last 15 minutes is true. How do we sit down with these people at a table, at a desk, on the couch if they're a member of senior leadership?
So before you get there, begin to formulate your ideas through this lens. People feel politics long before they think about politics. And this goes for policy too. The best way to illustrate it is like this. When I say to you, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, before you can list off any policies, you immediately have a feeling. So think about what your opening set of words will be to that legislator to make them feel that this is important. I think a part of that is my second point, hyper-localize. Make them understand why this is important to their district. Go in with the facts and figures of why it's important. You have this many libraries in your district, it's used by this many people, right? Like things along those lines. And I think the third part of this is be crystal clear and concise about what your legislation is or what you're trying to stop. Legislators receive binders a day of briefing upon briefing upon briefing. You've got to leave them with 2 or 3 points about why this is important. And I think, in addition to making people feel politics, you've got to be able to articulate concisely why it's important. And using numbers to illustrate that is fantastic. I believe, when we were up on Beacon Hill in Massachusetts, going and lobbying, we talked about the number of book challenges that took place here in Massachusetts. Nobody believed the book challenges are things that happen in their own backyard, but we came fully prepared with this sheet of all the communities across the Commonwealth that faced some level of book challenge, which I thought was incredibly powerful because you saw legislators look at that sheet and say, oh, wow, this is happening in 2 towns away from mine, or this town's in my district. Or, we even had some who were fully aware of the book challenges, but, it definitely served to bolster the fact that they're not in this by themselves.
It's interesting that you bring up the data as storytelling, and I think that's underappreciated, Joe. From a comms perspective, again, the data as a story. You're a sports guy, okay? You and I have known each other for a couple of years now. We've never had a conversation about sports because I'm illiterate. I'm absolutely illiterate. But I've seen you in contexts where you've had a conversation about the team, and I know really clearly that the first thing you start talking about is stats. Before you get to the player, before you get to the franchise. And I think that's underappreciated in political communications, those stats.
That's absolutely right. And I think, we have a real opportunity here to localize this. So when you go in to talk to your state rep, of course, we had a list of all the book challenges that happen all throughout the Commonwealth, but we also had a list of the book challenges that happen in their district if that in fact happened, which is powerful because it goes and localizes this big sweeping issue. Exactly.
All right, so you're starting up a semester at Endicott College. How are your students in terms of their constitutional literacy? Are they coming in prepared out of high school? Are you having to do remedial America 101 with these kids?
I think it's a little bit of both. I have the fortunate opportunity to teach a series of upperclassmen, so they are committed to the ideas of political science and the fundamental practices of it. So, our conversations have been really great. What's been most interesting to me is the perspective that these folks go and offer, chiefly because, at 38 years old, I don't think of myself as somebody senior in my years, but I have a classroom full of students who are 20 to 22 years old, which is a generation removed from mine. It has been incredibly fascinating to think about how they view the problems that we see, the Constitution, our public officials, and the dependence on the system that we have. around the time of September 11th, I asked my students, how many of you remember that day? I was shocked
Yes.
when I realized, and they told me, none of them were born.
No.
So you have a completely different generation in terms of the way that they view and see the world, which has been a growing experience for me.
Yeah, Joe. I mean, you're in your late 30s. I'm in my mid 50s. You're teaching kids who are my son's contemporaries. And my kids were born in 2005, 2008, and I'm glad that I'm not the only one in this conversation today that feels old. But I do know that the conversations that you're having with those students right now are part of that American conversation that's so important. Like, how do we want to renew these principles? How do we want to come back around to the idea of separation of powers? I mean, you look at even what's happening with the Library of Congress right now, or the National Archives, where there's these sincere conflicts between, Article 1, it's Congress, it's the Library of Congress, and then Article 2, the president doing overreach. I mean, the teaching of that right now is I mean, God forbid you live in interesting times. It's got to make for really interesting conversations.
Well, I think one of the parts that's most fascinating to me is my generation and the ones before us had the opportunity to look at the federal government as something that was just like always there, always rock solid, always going to act in our best interest, even with varying degrees of that. You've got this generation of folks in this country whose only opportunity to see American politics has been viewed through the lens of a Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton, a Donald Trump versus Joe Biden, a Donald Trump versus Kamala Harris. That has certainly had a lasting impact on the way that they think about our future, they think about their own future, and they think about the country.
Yeah. So one of the projects I'd love to see if we can't figure out how to do with your students is to get them involved in like a library board or a school board. Get them out there into that extremely local level. Parting thoughts here for me, Joe, about the application of the Constitution at that most local level. I think that there's a path forward. I mean, maybe it's the First Amendment, maybe it's 14th Amendment and equal protection around readers, but I think that there's a 10th Amendment conversation. Because if it's just about fights in the federal government, if it's about disruption of the federal government, get to that state level, that local level, seems like it's a pathway forward for us to really solidify the American experiment again.
It's about the American idea. It's about the American idea of a better tomorrow achieved through the ingenuity and devotion of our citizens. And it's the belief that our future is always brighter than our past. And no matter how dark the storm is, and no matter how dark the clouds are, no matter how trying the moment is right now, tomorrow will be better. Because at the end of the day, we have a society that can always rebound and develop itself and redevelop itself to building a better tomorrow.
I appreciate you very much for that. Thank you for the help that you've given to the library communities around the country. Joe, you've been a stalwart in Massachusetts and in New Hampshire as well. The advice and the counsel you've given us as an organization and the friendly advice that you've given to other colleagues in the Northeast and around the country, I'm grateful to you for it, because you've got a good ear for that values system conversation, that identity conversation, and the particulars of law that make it possible for the Constitution to continue to be implemented. So thank you.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for the kind words, and I look forward to chatting with you soon.
Have a happy day of it. What we do here at EveryLibrary, Joe, is we wave at everybody who watched us. Thank you. I put up the thing, and then you and I talk in the green.